Now let's discuss how to document an integrated management system. So management system standards are based in a process approach. And what that means is that anything can be defined as a process. A process is a set of interrelated activities that are performed to achieve an intended result. So in a process you will have an input, then you will transform those data, the resources, and then you will get a result, an output. So the process approach is one of the core principles of effective management systems. And then it gives you a consistent and predictable result achieved more effectively and efficiently when activities are understood and managed as interrelated processes that function as one system. The key benefits of the process approach are that you could have enhanced ability to focus your efforts on the key processes that add value to your product or service. You have consistent and predictable outcomes through your system of aligned processes. You optimize the performance through effective process management and efficient use of resources and reduce cross-functional barriers. And you enable an organization to provide confidence to the interested parties as they will gonna have consistency, effectiveness, and efficiency. As I said, any activity can be expressed as a process. So when you think about making a cake, a coffee, managing risk, publishing documents, reporting a hazard, working at heights, any activity that we do, it can be expressed as a process. The process approach includes establishing the organizational process to operate as an integrated and complete system. So you will have to identify systematically, not per department. It have to be the activities that add value, that transform input into resources, and then how they interact. So you then, once you identify your processes within your organization, then you need to identify the indicators, the measurements that they're going to show you whether or not that process has been effective, and you're going to define what needs to be documented depending on the organizational context. One of the tools that you could use to actually document processes and understand your processes within an organization is called process mapping. And this is the first stage to document a process. A mechanism that you could map a process is called SIPOC, Supplier Input Process Output Customer Approach. We will talk about that later. And then something that you have to think is that activities and tasks that can always be subdivided into sub-processes. So don't get too bogged down into the detail. Just try to think as activities in high level, and then you could subdivide them later on all the detail that you need to do to be consistent and make sure that every time that you do the task, you get the same result. So you could have a flow chart with high-level core steps for that process, and they could maximum be six steps or less. Then you could drill down in those core steps and describe the steps involved in that specific step. I will explain that later. Or you could have a level 3 flowchart that actually describe you step by step, and that's normally what you will write in a work instruction. Or you could have the deployment charts of swim lane maps that give you simultaneously all the different interested parties that participate in a process and who is responsible for what. So let's have a look at the supplier input process output customer requirement model. So a supplier is the provider, internal or external, of inputs to your process. So it's important to recognize that everyone receives inputs from a supplier, then you add value to it through your process, and you provide it as an output that hopefully meet the customer expectations and their needs. And then you are always trying to exceed the requirements, and you will gather feedback about your product and processes, and then you will put it back into your added value, your transformation activities to improve them and ensure that next time you're better. So the inputs are the material, the resources, the information, the requirements, the data that you need to execute the process, to transform them into outputs. So the process is the set of structured activities that you will conduct to transform those inputs into outputs. So these activities have a starting point and an end point. And the outputs are the products of services that result from the process. And your customer is your end user, that person that receives that output. In summary, every activity that you have within a management system can be mapped using this CPOC model. And it's important that you understand the interrelationship between processes in an organization and what are your core adding value activities, what are your support processes, what are your check-in processes, and what are your top management and strategic processes. For instance, a support processes is usually HR, document control, procurement, and the core activities are actually what generates money, what the business makes the money from. So it could be making plastic cans, it could be producing a service, it could be selling oil. Those activities, getting the information from the client, what do they need, and then transform them into a product or a service, those are the ones that add value, that differentiate your organization from any other. So to build a CPOC model, what you need to do is first, you need to define the process steps and the boundaries of that process. So that will define the scope of your process, so the starting point and the end point, meaning what does the process include and what it excludes. You will also need to identify the process owner, so who is going to be responsible and accountable for the process itself and its outputs. So in general, the process owners are the key decision makers for the process. They allocate and control participants, workers, they manage the inputs, the outputs, and the resources, and control most of the financial component of the process. Then after that, you're going to define the process steps. They must be written in a sequential order. So they, again, plan, do, check, and act. So that you know from your starting point, from your end point, what do you have to do in that sequential way to actually transform your inputs into outputs. So try to keep these steps at a high level and don't get caught up in the detail for each one. Just set exactly what you do. After you have defined the process steps, you will then need to identify the outputs for each step and overall outputs for each process. So these are the tangible products or intangible services that is created by the processes and passed to the customer. Then you will define the customer for each output. And then what do they need from that output? What is the requirement that you're trying to fulfill and why the customer needs that output? So these are the kind of questions that you need to ask yourself about. After you have done that part, the right-hand side of the model, of the mapping, you then identify the inputs. So what is it that you need to actually be able to perform the process activities and hence deliver the outputs? And then you identify who supplies you with those inputs. And then you create your CPOC. You create a clear picture of the process. So you might think that you are creating it backwards, but this is essential for you to have that understanding on how the process works. If we have a look at an example, for incident management, we first define the process. So where is the process of incident management start? Does it start when an incident takes place and it finishes when you actually close the incident, when you have investigated, when you have implemented the actions and you are sure that it's not going to happen again? So you will have 6 steps, 6 core steps. So those are notification, reporting, investigation, reviewing, communication, and monitoring. So if we have a look at the first step, which is notification, for example, the output of this is an initial incident classification and assessment. And who needs to know about this? Who received that output? The HSEQ department. And we are thinking here holistically because it could be an environmental incident, it could be a non-conformance, it could be an injury, it could be an illness in the workplace. And then why does the HSEQ department needs to know? Because they want to ensure that you have appropriate controls in place. That the incident took place, but we have controlled them. We have minimized the impacts of this incident. And then you will then ask the question, what do I need? What resources are required for that notification? So the first step, you need that incident to happen. And then you will receive a notification via phone call or email from the supervisor or the work team. And those are your suppliers. So now we have mapped the first activity for that process. And you will then ask all the questions for each process steps to have a complete overview of that process. So just remember, don't get too bogged down in the detail. Just try to think, what do I need, who do I need it from, and why do they need it? And then in that way, you will get a clear picture of your process. And then once you have this clear picture, you can then document these process steps into a procedure. And you can make sure that every time that an incident happens, everybody is going to follow these process steps and ensure that you will have an incident report, you will have an investigation, and you will have corrective actions. So in summary, a process is a set of interrelated activities that are performed to achieve an intended result. Process mapping is the first stage to document a process. And the supplier input process output customer SIPOC approach is a mapping tool to understand and document processes.